Monster Hunter is one of my favorite series ever, and I just wanted an excuse to talk about some of my favorite monsters before the release of Wilds, which will no doubt introduce new ones that I'll come to love. The monsters I'll be talking about today aren't niche picks by any means, but I still wanted to share why I love them and showcase the different ways these monsters can be appreciated. If you don't know anything about Monster Hunter, I hope that this makes the games seem interesting enough to you to give them a try, and if you're a veteran, I hope you can find something new to love about these three. Without further ado, let's get into the video. Though technically a new monster in the main series, Espinos has been around as the flagship of the MMO Monster Hunter frontier. Getting to hunt it in Sunbreak felt like a treat, as Espinos is a monster I had only ever heard about and wanted to hunt, much in the same way Monoblos is to me today, though Monoblos did appear in stories too. I grew to be a fan of Espinos because of its hunt. Espinos is a flying wyvern with extremely potent fireballs, and while that led me to believe it might fight like a Rathalos, or Rathian, it actually tends to use its huge frame and weight to swing with reckless abandon against the hunter. That's not to shame its fireballs, as Espinos' fireballs not only deal fire damage, they inflict paralysis and poison at the same time, meaning if it catches you with one, you can be sure to receive a direct hit. I really enjoyed this frantic style of hunt. Espinos fights like a wild force of nature, and to me feels almost like a D&D barbarian. The way its enraged state makes its body easier to hit but much more deadly. One of my favorite things in Monster Hunter is its lore, and implied lore specifically. Monster Hunter has all of this lore buried under item descriptions and environmental storytelling, which to me is so fun. Admittedly, one of the main reasons I like Espinos is because of something I read in Amwell's Guide to Monster Hunting, a fan-made Monster Hunter D&D expansion, where there's a story of a wyvern long ago who protected its forest from a Kushala Deora. To me, that monster is very heavily implied to be Espinos, which I think is so fitting after its fight, and they even have a turf war in Sunbreak, showing that their strengths are relative. The idea that this wyvern is on par with Elder Dragons, one of the most powerful groups of monsters capable of changing entire ecosystems, is already cool enough, but what really blew it out of the water for me was the introduction of Flaming Espinos. Its introduction sees it tank an attack from Teostra and retaliate with an absolute bomb of a fireball. Flaming Espinos is base Espinos turned all the way up, its fire more potent, its attacks more reckless and deadly, and its pursuit of its target relentless. Flaming Espinos is an even deadlier threat, and when it was released with the second title update of Sunbreak, I grinded it like crazy because the hunt was just that fun. I'm of the belief that the armors and weapons of every monster also point to some aspect of them, that by wielding them, you are embodying the monster who it comes from. To me, it feels like a sign of respect to don the armor of a creature you've come to know through combat, and what I love about Espinos' armor is that it's simple. Compared to most other monsters in its tier, its simple armor communicates to me that this monster is only about two things: practicality and strength. With plate mail and guards on its arms and legs and shoulders, the places you would use to strike or defend yourself, it seems that Espinos' armor is especially designed to be practical and useful in fighting, but also just kind of existing in the Monster Hunter world. Its weapons, and specifically the greatsword to me, is a clear sign of its aggressive and kind of simple nature and its approach to combat. The flaming Espionage weapons also feature the ability to poison the target, so you get to harness the power of its fire in your weapons, which to me is just so cool. I really love Espionage. It's one of my favorite monsters, so much so in fact that I put flaming Espionage in my top 3 on the most recent Monster Hunter poll. I hope we get to see it come back into the series, and hopefully with its introduction we can also see some more of the Frontier cast get introduced as well. But this is a video about 3 monsters, so let's talk about the next one, easily in my top 3 Elder Dragons. Malzeno is a fantastic monster with such an interesting story. Much like Gormagala did in the story of For You, Malzeno was a presence that was felt in the story of Sunbreak. I don't think Malzeno was as effective as Gormagala, but I honestly love Malzeno's personal story more than its plot-relevant one. Spoilers for Sunbreak, by the way. If you haven't played it yet and want to go in blind, you can go to this timestamp to skip this section. 1, 2, 3. Okay. So, Sunbreak spends a majority of its narrative building up Malzeno as the big bad of the game. It wields the power of the Curio, these blood-sucking parasites that have been causing trouble in Elgato. One of your companions gets sick, and Malzeno seems to be lording over the Citadel, which used to be a thriving kingdom. After defeating Malzeno, it's revealed that the Curio and the affliction going around are not its doing, but instead the doing of a much worse monster, the Archdemon of the Abyss, Geismagorm. This isn't anything new for Monster Hunter. Most games have this fake out where there's this second, more deadly final boss at the end of the game that you have to face. But what I love about this version of the story is that Malzeno is a vampire. Me personally, I'm a vampire enjoyer. Well, I'm a horror enjoyer in general, so I also really like Garen Golem and Luna Garen. But I'm more specifically a huge fan of the vampire mythos. Every horror monster stands for some kind of societal or personal fear. But what I love is looking at those fears examined from the monster's point of view. An easy example is the werewolf, traditionally used to show the fear of whatever that society or person deems as barbaric behavior. What happens when the werewolf doesn't want to be a werewolf? Well, then it's a story about the fear of being othered, for whatever reason that may be. In the case of the vampire, however, this monster who preys on those beneath them through charm and wealth and influence, vampires are a clear stand-in for the fear of a predatory upper class and an examination on the horror of that power imbalance. I could wax poetic endlessly about them, but what happens when a vampire doesn't have the wealth and status? What happens when a vampire is not born, but is instead made? In comes the true Malzeno. It was said that the Malzeno we know resembled a legend of old, and in the final update to Sunbreak, we got to see what that legend of old is. Primordial Malzeno tells this tragic story of a noble being who tried their best to fight off the vampiric influence, only to sadly fall victim to it at the end of its life. How does it tell the story? Through its hunt, of course. As you hunt Primordial Malzeno, all the attacks that the base Malzeno exhibits are there, but more refined and precise. And when Primordial Malzeno powers up, you see it struggle to keep itself in control before letting out a roar. And this happens every single time he hits a different phase. This struggle against the Curio is an ongoing battle and only gets more difficult as time passes, until it can hold on no more and it fully succumbs to the Curio. Its pale scales, once appearing like gleaming armor, blackens with the corruption it has fallen victim to, and it becomes the avatar of the Curio's relentless thirst for blood. It almost feels like a mercy to defeat Primordial Malzeno, to ensure that it doesn't wreak the havoc it so desperately fought against. This is to say nothing of its armor or weapons, which are phenomenal and touch more on the status of the mythical vampire, but truthfully, I care much more about the story that Malzeno tells through its gameplay. I will never forget my first hunt against Malzeno when it wrapped itself in its wings and teleported behind me. How insanely cool and inspired that felt for a vampire dragon. I will also never forget the spectacle and the somber realization I felt after defeating Primordial Malzeno for the first time. Most of the monsters featured in this series are grounded in their design and are inspired by actual animals, which is why it's so fascinating what the team at Capcom did with this concept. Making a dragon resemble a vampire feels almost too easy, but somehow they made it feel fresh and innovative. It's because of this story and Malzeno's general design that I think it's one of, if not my absolute favorite Elder Dragon. But it isn't my favorite monster. I'd like to talk about the third monster of this video, and my absolute favorite. Unlike the other two monsters on this list, I didn't have an initial excitement or an invested interest as the foundation of my relationship to this monster. No, instead, I had a vendetta. I started playing Monster Hunter on my 3DS as a kid with 3U. It was my introduction to the series, and it showed. I recently found my old copy of the game and saw I had 200 hours only to be HR3. I wasn't good at the game at all, but I remember really enjoying it. Until I encountered Barioth. Up to this point in the game, I've been getting by struggling against Barioth, Royal Ludroth, Kurapeko, but Barioth felt impossible. My weapon of choice at the time, and still my favorite weapon, was the Greatsword, and back in 3U, the Greatsword was even slower than in the recent games. Hunter mobility was much lower pre-Gen 5, so it felt like Barioth was able to dash around me and I had no answer. By the time I reached it, hoping to strike, it was already jumping around and readying its next attack. I failed that quest so many times, and instead of giving up, I went back to the drawing board. Barioth is an ice monster, so it stands to reason that it would be weak against fire, and because of that, I set out to make the Rathalos Sword and Shield, hoping that by using a faster weapon, and by using a fire weapon, I would be able to exploit the openings I could see. But that also meant grinding Rathalos, which meant using a bow, because it was always in the air. It also taught me that flash bombs are great for knocking monsters out of the sky. And after crafting the sword and shield, I began preparing for Barioth. I went on harvest tours and patrols of Deserted Island to build up the resources to have enough flash bombs to last me 3 attempts, and enough potions to get me through those attempts. I upgraded my armor, and it was silly of me to use Barioth gear, but I saw a high enough defense stat and figured it would do. Then began the countless attempts, the endless carding, and the loss of Zenny. Failing the hunt so many times meant I had to go and farm Zenny again, just to make another attempt. And after days of failed attempts, I remember the feeling of satisfaction I got finally succeeding and defeating Barioth for the first time, the frustration of its agility gone, and this wall defeated. Then, I checked its armor and weapons, and saw this. I still honestly don't know how to pronounce the name of the sword and shield, but it was the coolest thing. And if it weren't enough, while doing an event quest, I also got to see this, the Tenebra. I thought for a while that this was the default Barioth longsword, and I was pretty bummed to learn that it wasn't, but after seeing how cool those weapons looked, I knew I had to grind to get them, and so I did. That first hunt felt more like a fluke, but as I learned the Barioth fight more and more, I learned how to dodge through its attacks and retaliate. I learned how to predict its movements. I learned that breaking its wings would make it less agile, and that cutting its tail would reduce the range of its tail swipes. It felt as I fought it more and more, I got better. Not that I leveled up my character more, or that I had higher numbers to do more damage, just that I, as a player, and I, as a hunter, got better. That feeling is what Monster Hunter is to me, and it's what made me fall in love with the series. And when I finally had enough materials to make the full Barioth set, its armor and its sword and shield equipped, I felt proud. and that was something I really needed as a kid. I grew up feeling pretty lonely and not having the best self-esteem, but that felt like a real accomplishment to me. It still is, and because of that, Barioth is my favorite monster. Getting to see Barioth get some love with the introduction of Frostfang and Iceborne felt great too, but nothing will ever top that feeling of finally beating it in the back of the car on my little 3DS. So, yeah. Those are my 3 favorite monsters. I really adore this series, and I know that everyone's got a different list, so if you've got a story to share, please do so in the comments. Monster Hunter Wilds is coming out pretty soon, and I'm ecstatic to play it. I'm so glad that this niche series I used to enjoy basically alone has become so successful and has all this love around it. I can't wait to see what new monsters appear and what new stories they'll spawn. Thanks for watching. I hope you have a great day, and if you're not, I hope you can find a reason to smile anyway. This was my first video that I've ever made and ever fully edited on my own, and it's been a blast. And I really want to do some more of this, so stay tuned to watch some more. See you in the next one.